At Disability Rights Arkansas, we are focused on guidance for people with disabilities on how to navigate your rights, things that help with your everyday life, and how to navigate the complex systems of how to get the support you need. I'm your host, Lainey Jennings Hall. In this podcast, including you, we bring that information directly to you, the listener, on things like accessibility questions, career and care, and even the nuances of love life with a disability. Everyone has the right to know their rights. Everyone, including you. And summer has officially kicked off. For a lot of people, that means travel, and we don't want that to intimidate anyone. I'm joined by Jen Goodwin, DRA staff attorney.
Yes, I will be more than happy to share a couple stories that have happened to me over the years.
And Mollie Hernandez, an advocate here at DRA.
Be loud and proud about your disability. Let them know what you need, because you just can't assume that the accommodation is there and that it's going to meet your needs.
Both travel extraordinaires are here to share not just tips, but real-world experiences from their travels, both the good and the bad. Thank you guys for joining me today here on Including You. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today on Including You. I'm so excited to have you guys on the podcast. So, Jen, do you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself today?
Sure. My name is Jen Goodwin, and I have a spinal cord injury. So I'm actually quadriplegic. That happened when I was 25. So interestingly enough, for this topic, I actually had done extensive traveling pre-injury. And so the differences between before my injury and after my injury are very, very different in experiences for sure. Before injury, I had traveled and done study abroad in Australia and been all over the country traveling for work by myself, so independently. And then now I require people to go with me on most trips, and just trying to navigate airplanes and trains and new cities and all the different forms of transportation as a wheelchair user, and as a power wheelchair user, I should add, because that does add an extra layer in there. Has been eye-opening and a challenge, and I'm 15 years out from injury, and I'm still learning new tips and tricks. So hopefully something that we've experienced can help someone out there that can answer a question that you may have.
Yes, thank you, Jen. I'm so excited to have you on. And I'm glad you pointed out you haven't stopped traveling. You traveled before injury and post-injury, and you're still finding new tips to keep going. We're also joined here today by Mollie Hernandez. Mollie, do you want to give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. My name is Mollie Hernandez, and I am blind due to a degenerative retinal condition. So I, like Jen, I'm kind of a lifelong traveler, but there were many years when I was low vision as opposed to blind, and spent some time wondering, okay, how do I accommodate this? Is it okay for me to ask for accommodation? Am I disabled enough situation? And a lot of times having to kind of defend my need for accommodations when traveling because my disability wasn't very visible for a while. So there's that. I also travel with a seeing eye dog, Boomer. So I have those experiences as well, traveling with my guide dog. I'm a mom of two, and they're teenagers now. They're 15 and 17, and they don't remember me not being blind. So I have traveled with small children on up to teenagers as a blind parent. So that kind of adds another dynamic and level of fun to the picture when we travel. So yeah, Jen and I are so excited to get to do this topic for disability rights. And I think we'd like to let our bosses know that if they need some more extensive research into this topic, we're all in. You know, we're happy to go anywhere to better inform our listeners.
Yeah, anything for work, right? Anything to better the experience.
Mollie and I travel together. So we enter a plane in a power wheelchair and with a service animal, and the airline usually has no idea what to do with us at that point.
Yes. We have shocked some airlines when we come in mass on our work trips.
Let's start with air travel. So I know you guys have both had some very unique experiences, and Mollie, you kind of hit on it a little bit when you hit on your intro about advocating for yourself. Was this the same trip that you guys took together when you had back-to-back experience, or were these separate ones?
This was separate. I was actually flying alone without a guide dog. This was a few years past. In fact, I believe I was traveling to be matched with my guide dog at the time. And so I was traveling alone independently from Arkansas to New Jersey. And when you travel with a disability, and this is something we can talk more about, or maybe I'll explain enough now. When you check in, you can explain that you have a disability and that you need an escort to and from the gate, someone to assist you in navigating the airport for our layover, because we live in Little Rock. Very few things are direct out of Little Rock. So I did have a changeover and I had to wait for my connecting flight. I was waiting for the person to come and assist me to get me from the gate that I was exiting the plane from to my next gate. And they did come and pick me up. But my problem was I just assumed everyone realized that I was blind. And the person that assisted me, they had a wheelchair for me, which is fine. I don't mind, because not everyone is really good at guiding a blind person using sighted guide, which is where you would walk from gate to gate. So I was fine. I was happy to use the wheelchair. And when we got to the final gate where I was supposed to get on my plane, we were kind of out in the waiting area. The person assisting me said, "You need to stand up now." And I just thought they meant, okay, we're not going to drive the wheelchair down the tunnel. They're going to go park it. So I stood up and kind of turned around waiting to grab their arms so they could assist me the rest of the way. And they were gone. I had not properly educated them and advocated for myself, saying, "Hey, I'm a blind person. I'm going to need some physical assistance all the way to the plane." They were just gone. And I was just kind of there in no man's land. And of course, you can imagine how noisy airports are for me to even try and get my bearings. It was a frightening few seconds, very, very long seconds, before another passenger actually came up and said, "Are you blind? I just saw what happened. Do you need help?" And of course, I was like, "Yes, please help me." And they guided me all the way to the plane. They actually told the flight attendant what happened. And the flight attendant was very kind, came to me later and was like, "That's unacceptable." And it was, but I won't completely remove the fault from myself for not having properly advocated. So when you need an accommodation, be loud and proud about your disability. Let them know what you need, because you just can't assume that the accommodation is there and that it's going to meet your needs. And with those people that do help us from gate to gate, while this is not at all something you have to do, if I get someone who is just stellar, because keep in mind, I'm the girl that was left, alone. If I get someone who's gone above and beyond, I always keep a little cash in my pocket to give just a small tip, just to say, "Hey, thanks. This was a good experience." So they're just escorts that get you where you need to go. One more thing that I forgot to say, and this is kind of a little known fact. If I'm flying by myself, of course, right when I check in, I can request an escort. But if whoever has taken me to the airport, most likely my husband, if they have time to wait with me, they can get a gate pass. And they can be the person to escort me directly to my gate and then hand me off at the plane to the flight attendant. And again, you always like to be in familiar hands as long as you can, because no one knows me better than my husband on how, I like to be escorted or guided through an unfamiliar area. So it's kind of a little known fact. It's been, probably like 4 years since I've done that. That's the last time I think I flew by myself, but it was still a thing then. So anyhow, it's nice to know.
So with flying as a wheelchair user, Mollie mentioned before about going through security. So for me, whenever I go through security, I obviously can't stand up and go through the metal detectors. So I get a full on pat down. So TSA and I become very familiar with each other. On that trip, they're required to tell me exactly what they're going to do every single time that they do it. I know their song and dance, but they have to do it to check that off their list. So it's a full pat down of both myself and my chair. They try to get me to also give them all of my luggage so that they can, I don't know why they hand dig through all of my luggage if I bring it through with me. But usually I will just hand that to my family and let them bring it through security for me, so that it can just go through the rollers just like everybody else's, so that it's not getting dug through right out in the open with everyone. So I recommend that. And the other thing is actually when I board the plane. So I take my power chair down to the gate and onto the ramp, but I can't take it onto the plane with me. So they bring, it's called an aisle chair, because the aisles are only about 20 inches long or wide there. And so it looks like a furniture dolly with a seat on it. So usually I let my family lift me over, but they are required to have somebody that can help you with that as well if you can't do your own transfer over to the seat. And so they lift me and put me over on the seat. And then there are straps like buckles that crisscross across my chest and down to my waist. And then they also go around my knees area too to hold my legs where they're supposed to be. And then they literally just tip me backwards and wheel me onto the plane as if it's a furniture dolly. With the priority seating, they usually sit me on the front row unless that's first class. And then they'll move me back to, whatever class I paid for and sit on the front row there so that I have the bulkhead seating to be able to have extra room as needed for the transfer and all of that sort of stuff. But it's always a fun experience. Just a funny that happened to me at one point is they tipped me backwards and they were hitting my hips on every armrest down the aisle. And so I asked the lady, I said, "Oh, that hurts," because she kept hitting me. And she said, "Yeah, your hips are a little wide." Well, thank you for that. You made a girl feel really good today. Appreciate that. So, and while I'm the first person on the plane, I'm always the last person off of the plane. So it's usually a long experience, but I get to know the flight attendants really well. They're usually giving extra snacks to my kids and hanging out, and we just have a good time. So if you're open minded and willing to be pleasant, then you'll get some fun experiences with that. And then also, I get a transport at times. Again, I travel with two kids, so my family is often busy trying to get them navigated. And if I don't have my power chair at the gate, if we have a tight layover, then I will just take one of the chairs from the airport. And with those, they're not self-propelled. You have to have someone push you. And so sometimes I've gotten people who are just happy-go-lucky and cruising along and my name's being called overhead and I tell them to step on it. They've got to hurry. And then other times I have people who are like, beep, beep, coming through, and they're bulldozing people in the airport. So it's always fun to see what kind of adventures it's going to be.
No, that's a great point. And I do want to just hit just a second on the Air Carrier Access Act. So I don't know exactly what year, Jen. Do you happen to know what year that was introduced by chance?
I don't.
So it does state that all domestic and international flights that have the U.S. as the destination or origination point are required to provide necessary accommodations to people with disabilities to ensure safe travel. Now, in saying that, not all planes have the same accommodations, but you got to know to advocate for yourself. Not all air travel experiences are bad. As Molly hint, you just have to advocate for yourself, but you need to be aware ahead of time and have some expectations.
Yes, I will be more than happy to share a couple stories that have happened to me over the years. So, first of all, I do want to back up. Molly mentioned that you should mention your disability and what your needs are whenever you get to the gate, but I want to add that it should actually start before that. I actually just booked flights for my family and I. And I should also add, by the way, that I travel with two small children myself now. So I have a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. So that certainly adds an extra layer in there for traveling. And again, they look at me a little sideways whenever I come through the gates, but that's okay. We always make it work. But whenever I book my travel, there's a place to click a button that allows you to open up the accessible travel questions. And one of the things that it says is, are you a wheelchair user? And so I click yes on that. And then it opens up more questions. So it asks if I'm going to need aisle assistance. And I will explain more about that in just a second. And it asks if I'm going to need to borrow a chair or if I'm bringing my own. It asks if it's a power chair or a manual chair. And then what kind of batteries I use, because that will determine where they need to be stored on the plane and if they have to be removed from the plane or from the chair before flying. So those are some of the big questions. I know that they do have questions on there as far as if you are blind as well, and if you'll be traveling with a service animal. So I just saw those last night. So that is something that when you book your travel, you should do that at that point, but don't think that it's just going to get done. As Molly said, when you get to check in at the airport, go ahead and make sure that they have all of your needs out there so that they'll be prepared. And then also, when I get to the gate, I make sure that the gate agent knows everything too, because I've just traveled enough to know that this information gets lost in translation a lot. And as many people as I can talk to, the easier my travel is going to be for me and my family. So we always try to do that and be proactive every step of the way. But We'll tell you what happened with the Air Carriers Access Act at one point. Part of what the Air Carriers Access Act, the ACAA, says is that you can travel with medical equipment for free. And so I always have medical supplies that I have to have for my disability to be able to live and function whenever I go on trips. And it's more than what your average person needs whenever they go on a trip. And so, like, I might need a shower chair or something like that. Well, those things should travel for free. And on this particular trip, I actually called ahead of time through the disability guest services through the particular airline that I was traveling with just to follow their policy. I wanted to make sure that I knew what their policy was so that there wouldn't be any hitches in the plan. So I got to the airport. I had the law on my side and I had their company policy on my side, but I did not have a gate agent on my side. So the check-in person told me that I would be charged for those bags. So I will tell you one of the caveats is in that bag, it can only be medical equipment. So you can't pack your clothes, can't pack your shoes, whatever else in the same bag with your medical supplies. So you're still responsible for any of those bag charges that may be there. But any bag that is strictly dedicated to medical should be able to fly for free with you. And so I told them that whenever I checked in, because I checked on the policy, I knew what my rights were, and they still tried to charge me for the bag. And so in Little Rock, I stood at the gate forever waiting on the girl to check me in, or I guess at the check-in booth to get checked in for my flight. And she insisted on calling management. She sat on hold forever. And then finally, one of the guys that was standing there was like, move over. Because I looked at him and I don't normally do this, but I pulled out my disability attorney's card to let him know that I probably did know what the law was. And I didn't want to be a disability rights attorney today. I wanted to be a passenger on an airplane today. But my hat goes with me wherever I go. So I will be whatever I need to be today. So he saw that and he told the girl to move aside. He was going to get me checked in on my plane and was going to take care of my bags for me. And she's like, no, I'll do it. And he said, no, you missed your opportunity. I'm taking care of this girl and she's going to be fine on her way. And so I really appreciated that. Well, on my flight home from Sacramento, I went through the same ordeal, telling them at the gate that, I needed to be able to carry a medical bag home. And that girl stopped and told me no. I told her what their policy was, told her what the law was. She called a manager over. And the quote from the manager that day was, well, when they know the law, we have to follow it. And I just laughed when she said it because that summed up so much that's wrong in this country. And so it was just funny to me at that point. So that goes to tell you that know your rights, know the law before you travel.
And keep pushing back too, because it wasn't like your first and second attempt. You just had to keep advocating and keep pushing for it.
Yes. And just because we know our rights and the laws does not mean that the employees there do, though they should.
The DOT statistics from 2021 reported, and this is a huge number, 33,631 disability-related complaints. And over half of those complaints reported related to failure to provide adequate assistance to travelers using a wheelchair.
Wow.
I mean, that's ridiculous. There are some perks, though. You guys have talked about on the pre-boarding, you are first on. So make sure, as she had mentioned, when you are getting your tickets and everything, that you do correctly fill that out so that you can board correctly, because that it will be important.
So when I go to board, I make sure that's why I tell them actually at the gate that I will need pre-boarding. And so sometimes it makes other travelers a little mad if they've paid to be first on the plane or whatever, but I'm usually the very first person, and everyone in my party comes with me too, because I need their help. I need their assistance. And my two small children need to be sitting with me. They can't be separated from me on the plane. And so that process is pretty involved as well. I always take my power chair to the gate if I'm flying with a power chair instead of a manual. And usually I ask to speak to the person who's going to be transporting my chair, because this is a $20,000 wheelchair that weighs 400 pounds, and I need it to work for me whenever I get to wherever I'm going. So I want to talk to as many people as possible to make sure that they know how to handle this chair appropriately. And laying it on its side or picking it up by its seating base is not the way to handle it, because it's been broken probably 6 times by the airlines in the times that I've flown. And usually it's the tilt on it that gets broken. And that's something that I really need. I use it in and out all day, every day for pressure relief and positioning in my chair. So I end up stuck on a vacation or a work trip or whatever without a function that I really need because they don't get fixed that quickly either. So I have a sheet that I've typed up that has my name and phone number on it. And it has specific instructions for how to turn the chair on, how to put it in a manual mode. And then I'll also tell them how to recline the seat back so that it will fit under the plane without having to be flipped on its side. And so I usually do it on a bright neon yellow piece of paper and have it rubber banded in a large gallon-sized plastic baggie so that it's not going to get wet, it's not going to get damaged, and it's going to be seen. Plus, I talked to the first guy who's going to be taking it and actually putting it on. And usually I feel like when they meet me and they have a person in mind for who that chair belongs to, they're going to be more likely to handle it appropriately. But on the other side of the landing, it's going to be different people. So they don't have that luxury. That's why they have a note that tells them exactly what to do. And they're the ones that have to give me the bad news when they damage it. So hopefully they're pretty careful with it as well. And honestly, since I've been doing that, it has really cut down on the number of times that my chair has been damaged. But I also always watch out the window, and I've gotten to see how it's handled on numerous occasions. And it is dumbfounding sometimes. Like, well, there goes my tilt as it's being flipped on its side and put up a conveyor belt. So good times. But one more fun story that I have to share is I was on a plane. We were taxiing down the runway, and overhead comes the pilot who tells us that we are going back for an important piece of equipment that has been left behind. And I jokingly said to my family, "Oh, I wonder if they forgot my chair." And the flight attendant said, "Yep, it's your chair."
Oh my
So we
gosh.
taxied back to the entrance to get my chair and have it loaded on. And I'm just so glad that we weren't in the air when that happened, because if I got to the other side with no chair at landing, that would have been a nightmare. But I'm also proud that the pilot recognized the importance of that and was willing to taxi back and get my legs essentially for me to bring on that plane.
So, question, if they hadn't had caught it, like if you had been in the air, like, are they supposed to do something to provide you some form of wheelchair?
So, what has happened in the past whenever they've broken my chair, and I assume that it would be the same if they just completely misplaced or forgot it, would be that they would call a rental company and have them come to the airport and bring a comparable power chair there for me to use. But depending on where you are and what time you get in, that's going to determine if those things are available. So, I honestly just hope and pray that that never happens. Because even when I've borrowed chairs places, it's like driving someone else's car, that it takes a little bit to get used to a different chair. And so it's always, a learning curve for sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Molly, I want to kind of throw it over to you as well, because I know you've taken Boomer, your seeing eye dog, on trips with you. Do you want to talk a little bit about service animals in the airport?
Absolutely. So, according to the Air Carriers Access Act, dogs are the only animal that are considered service animals. And the airport or the airline can require a couple of different forms from you. And like Jim said, when you are booking your flight, you can and should inform them that you are bringing a dog. There are two different forms, and there are samples that you can see online. And then, of course, you can actually access the actual forms to have them. One is just to certify that your dog is vaccinated, it is trained, that it does not have a tendency for aggression, and that you will keep your dog under your control at all times, that it will be attached to a leash or a tether at all times. And the second form is another one. It's a little different, and it's kind of where you attest that your dog can go long periods of time without needing to relieve themselves, that they wouldn't be prone to an accident on an airline. However, they're animals, accidents can happen. And I do advise take a little doggy emergency kit, have some Clorox wipes, some paper towels, anything that you might need. Most airports these days do have doggy relief areas within the secured area so that you don't actually have to go back out of the airport to find physical green space. And in truth, most of these dogs can go very long periods of times if necessary without having to relieve themselves. And we do take steps to reduce food, reduce water a little bit, kind of like we do as people, to avoid having to go too much. So there are steps to take. Other things with traveling with a guide dog, when you have an escort through the airport, you do need to alert them to things like you want to use elevators, even if there are escalators or moving walkways available, those can risk your dog's toes. We have trained to do those things when necessary with our dogs. If there are alternatives, use the alternatives. It's better. Let's talk a little bit about going through security. What I tell everyone is when I get rushed is when I'm most likely to get hurt. I'm going to get distracted from the signals that Boomer is trying to give me on navigating. Security just always feels very, very rushed. And not so much by the TSA personnel, but just by the other travelers. So it's another time to fully advocate for yourself with a guide dog. It is never appropriate for them to say, let me hold your dog and you go through. What I do is I change my dog's leash up to a long leash, which gives me about 3 feet to work with. I'll make him sit and I'll just hold the leash while I walk through the metal detector. And then I'll call him to me holding the leash. So typically there's a TSA agent at the other end of the metal detector to kind of direct me because I'm not working the dog at that time. I'm just healing him, helping, just hanging on to him as we go through these things. And then what they'll do is after Boomer comes through, they'll do kind of a physical pat down of him, just kind of checking his harness and things, making sure that there's nothing hidden underneath his harness. So it's one of those things, again, advocate for yourself. Most of the personnel is really, really good. And I always feel like they're actually excited to get a moment to interact with the dog up close and personal. It depends. I always offer, do you need the harness off? I can take the harness off. We've got that down to an art. It only takes a few seconds. But there are people with some mobility issues that it might be a bigger deal. So I assure them, it's okay to touch my dog. It's fine. And that's kind of how you get through security. But again, just don't get in a hurry. Always let people know this is your time. You've got a system. Don't let them mess with your system. Say, I'll come through first, then I'll bring my dog, or however you were trained at your own school. Then when we do get to our gate and it's time to board, I do pre-board for people that need assistance. So once we get in, I do take the dog's harness off. Boomer's a big dog. He's almost 80 pounds and he's just a big, lanky guy. So I take his harness off to make sure that he's comfortable. And then I sit him down facing me and then make him lay down. And then I'll kind of push his little bottom up underneath the seat in front of me where other people might stow a carry-on bag. That's where Boomer goes. And I always let the flight attendant know to kind of be careful with the harness. I mean, they're fairly durable, but if someone's throwing heavy baggage on top and stuff like Jen, if something happened to that harness, I don't have a way to communicate with my dog. Our communication goes through that harness handle, that pull that I get from him. So if that harness is broken, that's a problem. So I always try and make people aware, please make sure that the harness is stored safely. I keep a few things for Boomer on the plane with me. They feel the pressure changes just like we do in our ears. If I notice him starting to do that head shake, like you would think a dog would do with an ear infection or something, I give him a couple little dog cookies or something just to, help him swallow and pop those ears. When the flight attendants come by and offer drinks, I usually get a cup of ice for the dog or save some of my ice so that he has a little something to wet his mouth. He can't really drink, but just something for him to chomp on. Most times, in fact, truly every time, Boomer just sleeps the whole way. He's very, very well behaved. He is attached to me at all times. So yes, I've put the harness away, but he is always on leash. The dog always needs to be under my control. Flight attendants dote on him. So I know as much as we say what goes wrong, there are so many people that are very helpful and very knowledgeable. So in fact, one of my guide dogs, we didn't realize at the time that he was coming down with an illness called Addison's disease, but he got sick on a plane. He threw up, and the flight attendant was lovely. She was like, it's no big deal. It happened right at the end of the flight. She was like, we have a cleaning crew. Don't worry about it at all. I mean, it's that mom instinct. It was like, oh my gosh, look what my kid did. But it's a dog. And they were so sweet. So no matter how you prepare, things may go sideways, but it's all right. If you start stressing while you travel, that transfers to your service animal. So keep it cool, make it enjoyable, because they'll remember that for subsequent trips. I mean, Boomer gets excited when we travel, and he gets excited when he sees the suitcases come out in the house. So just remember your stress and anxiety, it does transfer. So, it's not always a fun thing to travel, especially by airline, because a lot of stuff is out of your control, but it's something that we all need to do just to be a part of our community. It's important.
You had mentioned that sometimes you bring like in a little emergency bag for a Boomer, or you kind of suggested it. Is that one of the types of bags that would fly free, or is it only medical equipment?
So his harness, things like that qualify as medical equipment. I've never really had to push it that much, but to my understanding, if I wanted to bring a small carry-on that included his dog food for the trip and feeding bowls, things like that, that would qualify. For my little emergency pack that I keep, it's just something small in a Ziploc that I throw in a backpack. But if I needed to be gone an extended amount of time, I think it's arguable. I haven't actually checked what the Air Carrier Access Act says or the airline's policy on it, but I certainly think it's arguable. I have been known to go over my, whatever it is, 40-pound, 50-pound limit with baggage, and sweet talk the check-in person and say, okay, I'm really sorry, but there's dog food in there. I'm sure it's the dog food that made me go over. And, they're kind. So, because dog food's heavy, but usually it's my return trip and it's souvenirs that make me go over.
But also a dog crate, something like that, would be counted as medical equipment for a service animal.
Absolutely. Yes.
I know I've specifically heard about your trips to Disney with Boomer. You just want to maybe give a fun little anecdote about some fun travel with Boomer.
Boomer has made his maiden voyage to Disney during the pandemic, in fact. And a shout out to Disney for their accessibility, especially for the blind. And your dog gets into the park. There are even certain rides that you can take with your dog. You do need an access pass, an ease of access, which makes it a little easier to board and get off of certain rides. But for some of the rides that are a little scarier, that it wouldn't be appropriate to make a dog ride, you can do what's called a rider swap, which means I would hold my dog and part of my party would take the ride, and then they would come out, hold my dog, and then I would ride with other people in my party. Or my kids like it when there's not a lot of crowds, and basically they get to ride twice in a row if we do rider swap. There's also options where you can leave your service animal in a crate right there where you would get on the ride, and that has worked out well for me too, just putting him in the crate just for the duration of the rides. There's always an attendant there talking with him, keeping him company. They have some dog cookies. They ask if it's okay to give. So those things go great at Disney. Just make sure to get that access pass. I can tell you, on one of my very first trips to Disney, taking my first guide dog, we were going through and my kids were little. We had that big double stroller that you could rent at Disney at the time. And my son was 4, and we were walking through the crowd, and I had my guide dog. My husband had the stroller. And as we met someone, this lady looked at my dog and she was like, oh my goodness, what a beautiful service animal. My son, he turned around and he said, that is not a circus animal. He's a seeing eye dog. So he had never heard service animal before and thought it was a circus animal. He made sure to educate. So in our household, even my kids know how to advocate for the guide dogs.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jen and Molly, and thank you, listeners. Now, as you can tell, there's so much to cover when talking about traveling. Make sure to tune into our next episode, a second part to this conversation, as we talk about booking hotels, Airbnbs, tackling the beach, and much more. You don't want to miss it. At Disability Rights Arkansas, we envision an Arkansas where people with disabilities are equal members in their communities and can dictate their lives through self-determination. And as made clear in this podcast, we can't create that change without bringing self-advocates to the table. If you're interested in more information, make sure to subscribe to this podcast and visit our website. And don't forget to leave a 5-star rating and a review.